Creator, whose breath gives life to all the world. Hear me now. I am small and weak. Let me look under every rock and leaf to learn the lessons that you have taught my people. I quietly meditate and I pray, and I find myself in that sacred place, in that sacred moment where I don't feel alone anymore, and that little child inside of me doesn't feel alone anymore. I don't have to feel alone anymore. I can go to ceremony, I can go outside, I can be a part of this creation that the Canadian government separated me from. Welcome to the first annual First Nation Child Welfare, Youth and Family Conference. My name is Wayne Snellgrove, born April 9th, 1971, Saskatchewan, Canada. The day of my birth, the Canadian government came in and they stole me from my mom, and they stole me from my heritage. They stole me from my culture. Of course, I didn't know this at the time. When I was at the hospital, CSA came in, Child Aid Services came in, and they stole me. It just came in and they put me in state care hundreds of miles away. And I can remember my first memory was of a big hall with lots of beds. And I can remember it was very dark and very eerie and very scary. I didn't like this. And this is my first memory of life. My next big memory was I was at an airport, and there's where I met my adopted family, my mother Ann and my father Richard. Of course, I didn't know this at the time. It was a pretty big day in my life because I was being pulled out of state-run care, orphanages, foster care. I was being pulled out of that system and brought into a wonderful home. But I didn't know this at the time. I didn't know what was happening at the time. I just knew that I was going off to another place, another home, another environment. And in this environment, I had a brother named Tom. Of course, I didn't understand the concept of a brother either. He was just this other child with me. We were about the same age. And that was by plan. He was adopted too by the Snellgroves. My name became Wayne William Snellgrove. I wanted to feel that beauty that I could see everywhere else in the world. I look up to the sky and I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to be part of the trees, and I wanted to be part of the sky and the beautiful flowers. And I just couldn't feel, I couldn't assimilate. I just couldn't assimilate with the world around me, with that feeling. So at 7 years old, I decided to take my life. I decided suicide was the only way out. And so what I did was I found a secret location in my dad's office because I wanted to go home. I was tired of being me. I neatly organized everything, and I went in the room and I figured that if I held my breath long enough that I wasn't going to be here anymore. And so I remember sitting there at 7 years old, and I would just I would hold my breath, and I'd be in so much pain, and I wasn't crying at all. There was no feeling other than just wanting to go, not wanting to be here. And I would hold my breath and hold so tight, and I was just hold it. And I did it again, and I did it again, and I did it again. I finally said, I can't do this by myself, and I got some tape, and I duct taped my mouth, and I said, and I would just lay down. And as I was laying there, choking for breath, I was happy. It was the first time in my life that I was really, truly at peace with what I was doing, and that if nobody loved me here, then there was no reason for me to be here. I knew I couldn't hold my breath to death. A year and a half later, after my suicide attempt, I was a nationally ranked 8 and under swimmer. And this is what I wanted to do. This is a place that saved my life, because I was able to find an avenue for that sad child, that now I had this outlet. And I think my parents were really happy to drop me off at the pool for a little while, because I was a handful. My first passion, because I can remember going in the pool and getting out my anger. And I found out early that if I got out my anger, then I felt better. If I beat up my body enough, I felt better. It really wasn't about racing or winning. It was about me feeling better. It was almost like spiritual, but I didn't even know what that was. It was kind of like an inside job. I felt better inside if I beat myself up physically. It was a weird dynamic. I don't really understand it, but every time I went to the pool after that, I just beat myself up. I got tired. And at the end of all of that, I ended up winning a lot of races. The more you win, the more you do well, the less people notice your skin color. And that was big. I didn't want to be different anymore. I wanted to blend in. And the more I won, the more people noticed me in a good way. They said, wow, this little 8-year-old kid, he's really a good swimmer. And I started getting noticed, and people started to recognize me in places I went. And this is new for me. This is a new dimension to my life. Kind of fast forward, I'm 12. I'm doing well, and 14 and 15. I'm still one of the top athletes in the country, and I can remember now I'm getting toward high school, and my anger is still seething. There was still something. I couldn't swim fast enough or far enough to quell my anger. At that point in my life, I had found drinking. I can remember taking that first drink, and I can remember it going down, and I can remember the way it made me feel. And the way it made me feel is that everything was okay. The pivotal point in my life, because I said to myself, I have to do this as often as I possibly can. And so along with my swimming, along with my anger, took care of most of my anger. Now I had drugs and alcohol. A week after I had broken a national record, I ended up in my first rehab. This was turning out to be a long journey with drugs and alcohol. My big battle with drugs and alcohol, because I just didn't know. And I went to my first AA meeting, was introduced to recovery for the first time, but I had no interest in recovery, because I couldn't be an alcoholic, I couldn't be a junkie, but that's exactly what I was. And a week later, I was sitting there in rehab, not knowing what happened. My parents, I was so ashamed of myself. And I can remember going back, remember being that little child sitting in my first rehab, just not knowing what was going on. I was so ashamed of myself and so scared that was going on. I can remember my parents coming up to visit me, and I couldn't see them. I wanted, because I knew I couldn't tell them anything. That this childhood memories of saying, just, you can't tell anybody anything, only the quiet ones survive. And I could still hear that little voice. I couldn't tell anybody anything at this point. I just became the stone wall from, and I'm not sure if I was trying to keep myself in, or I'm trying to keep you out, or maybe a little both. I couldn't, there was still that broken child. And I called my dad. I told him I was heading to the Jersey Shore. He was happy. I just wasn't going home to Massachusetts. So I ended up going down to the Jersey Shore. We ended up in a place called Atlantic City. I took the job there. I got the job there. Started working the beach, which is pretty cool, because I like getting paid to go to the beach. So this is really cool. My dad's happy. I'm swimming a little bit, and there's this guy named Sid Cassidy there. He was the national team coach, the open water national team coach there at the time for USA Swimming, for open water swimming. And I didn't know this at the time. I just show up to the beach to get paid. I do a little open water swimming. You know, I tell him about my shoulder problems. He said, don't worry about it, just go, you know, just do the best you can. And so what I did was I started training again. Kind of fast forward, I moved to Florida. If I'm gonna go down, I'm gonna go down swinging. And so I'm gonna step up to the plate again, and I'm gonna be a national level swimmer again. I finally go to my first national championship race, and I'm thinking in the back of my head, well, if I do a top 10 finish, I'm going to be really happy, because the USA's elite swimmers are going to be there. The best swimmers in the country are going to be there. I figure if I get a top 10 finish, that I'm going to be doing okay. And when the race day came, I'm sitting in our starting line. You know, we punch it from the starting line, and around the first corner, I'm in third place. I'm like, wow, this is really great. An hour later, I won my first national championship, and I had beaten all USA's the best open water swimmers in the country, and I became a national champion for the first time. And they asked me to be on the national team the next year later. The year after that, I won my second national championship, the 10K, and not only was I winning, I was staying sober, and I was working the beach here in Hollywood, Florida, and I was on my way, and at that point, my brother told me that my mom was sick. The only mother that I had ever known, she had cancer. I'm sitting there at my mom's funeral, the only mom that I have ever known. She's in a casket, and I'm saying goodbye to her, the only mom that I've ever loved. And she gave me the last gift, the last lesson that she gave me was a lesson in mourning and loss. And I was looking at her, and there's still a child inside me, and that child went to the funeral. And as I'm looking down there, tears are running down my face. And I had realized that I had been mourning my entire life and didn't even know. I had been sad my entire life and didn't even know. I was grieving my entire life and didn't even know, until I was sitting there saying goodbye to my mother. And I had a decision to make. What was I going to do now? And my decision was that I was going to honor her and the only family that I had ever known. But I had also known that maybe there's another mother out there. Maybe there's my mom out there. Maybe she's looking for me, because I never connected the dots until that point in my life. I had never even, there was no concept of my mother out there. It never crossed my mind. Maybe at 7, but I kind of outgrew it, and now it came back together again at my mom's funeral. So over the course of the next 2 weeks, I took care of my mom. I honored my mom, and I honored my family. I took care of my dad. I did the shopping for him. I cooked for him, and just, tried to be the very best son that I could. But on the other side, I took my birth records. My dad kept meticulous records, and I found my birth records. And after I went home back to Florida, I began searching for my birth mother. And I went through my records, his records, and I noticed that I was from Canada, which I already kind of knew, and I was Indian, and I kind of knew that. And it took me 7 years to find my my mom. And what had happened was I got to the point where there were 3 names and 3 numbers on a single sheet of paper, and they were of Nora Smoke. And I figured out that my birth name was Dwayne Ivan Smoke, and she was from the Fishing Lake First Nation. I was searching online, and I came across this Canadian adoption website, and I'm like, hey, I'm Canadian, this is cool. So I checked into it, and it was in a Canadian Indian adoption site, and I'm like, hey, that's really cool. That's wow. So I kept searching, and then they started talking about the 60's scoop, and I'm like, what is that? And so I kept searching, and what I found out horrified me. What they were doing was, and what nobody was talking about, what nobody knew, it was on this little teeny tiny website. As a matter of routine, taking healthy children out of healthy homes, healthy native children out of healthy homes. And I said, wow, maybe that's me. I needed that buffer from me to her, and through this website I had sent her an email explaining everything and my situation, and she actually got back to me 5 minutes after I sent the email, and she said, absolutely, let's talk tomorrow. So the next day came, we spoke on the phone, I explained the situation in detail, and she also explained that I was probably a product of the 60's scoop, and that I was probably taken. But let's make sure. Let's contact the mother, and so she said she would start calling the next day, and it was interesting. My life for the next 24 hours, it was a life or death thing, because I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if my mother was going to love me, if she was going to hate me, if she was going to reject me. And I was on eggshells for the next 24 hours. And I just bought in a house on West Hollywood, and I was doing something in the front yard, and I heard the phone ring, and I knew it was her. I knew it was the private investigator calling, and I ran through the front door, I ran through the house, I grabbed the phone, I ran into the bedroom, I locked the door, and I jumped on the bed and I said, hello. And the private investigator said, I've just spoken to the most wonderful woman I've ever spoken to. And just at that point, I knew that my mom still loved me. She said they spoke for probably 2 hours, and my mom said that she never forgotten about me. She'd always remembered me on my birthdays. She too was looking out the same window that I was looking for. She was looking out her driveway to see if her son was coming home. Told me to write probably just a page or two, a letter for the first time, and I didn't know how to do that, so I sent her 17 pages, my first letter, because like, how do you cover a whole life in 2 pages? I just couldn't figure out how to do that. So we corresponded back and forth for the first time, and then the next step was calling my mother, and then I can remember picking up the phone and calling and hearing my mother's voice for the first time, and she was just there is a bond there between mother and child that's never broken. And when I was talking to her, I connected with that right away. I sensed everything that she sensed. I sensed over the phone. I sensed that the love that she felt for me, and every word was magic to my ears. I remember walking off the airplane. I'm crying, and I can remember I told a couple people on the airplane as we're landing why I'm crying, so now they're crying, and then the pilot looked back and I told him, and now he was crying, so everybody wished me well, and I actually walked off the tarmac. I could see this group of Indians, and I never felt comfortable around Indians before, but that was the very first time that I felt comfortable with them. I saw them, and as I was looking at them, I saw my own face. I saw my own face in every one of them. And as I was getting closer, they got closer together. They were looking at me, and I was looking at them, and I rounded the corner, going up this little ramp, and all of them had clustered together, and in the middle of that cluster was my mother, and we made eye contact about halfway up that ramp, and I knew I was home. I knew I had found home. I knew I had reunited with the very love that brought me into this world. And I went over and I gave her a hug, and I told my mom that I loved her. I was 32 years old. What do you say to your mom at 32 years old? Well, like, how do you do that? And that's just what I did. I went over, I hugged her, and she loved me, and there was a bond there, and my sisters were there, and my brother was there, and my nieces and a couple other nieces and nephews were there. We all hugged, and they all were looking at me, and I was looking at them, and I was felt a part of for the first time, probably in my lifetime. I loved them. I loved them, and then that started my spiritual recovery. And I'm in my tribal office. I'm walking around on my reserve for the first time, just looking over the landscape, and just feeling a calm and a peace with myself. And I'm like, it's like I could take a big deep breath for the first time, and I can remember I was worried about, well, what do I do now that I found my family? It's great to love my family and have that connection, but I still didn't know how to be an Indian. So I was still trapped in one world. I was trapped in the white world that I was brought up in, and now I'm in the native world. And I was a little confused initially about which world to be in. What world do I belong in? Do I only belong in the native world, or do I only belong in the white world, and can I bring my white world into the native world, and can I bring my native world into the white world? I was confused about where to be. I was confused about who to pray to and how to pray to, and all those emotions. I one foot here and one foot there. I just didn't know where to be, and after my first trip to Canada, I came back and I prayed about it, and a few weeks later, I met my medicine man for the first time, and I'd asked him, I told him that I met my family for the first time, and he said, well, let's go to a sweat lodge now. Let's go to a sweat lodge. And I said, okay. Not knowing what that was, I said, okay. I said, okay, whatever. It sounds Indian, so I said, okay. And so off I went, and to my journey into native spirituality, to grow. I didn't know what a journey this was going to be. I didn't know anything about native spirituality because I hadn't grown up with any kind of spiritual background at all. No church, no concept of a higher power. And so when I came to my first sweat lodge, it looked just like this. Sitting in the womb of Mother Earth, and again, I was able to. I felt like I was home. I felt like this is where I need to be. So there was a second homecoming. There was not only meeting my natural family, my birth mother, my heritage and my culture, but when I was introduced to native spirituality, it also felt like home too. It's a place where I belonged. I felt comfortable. So for the second time in my life, in just a matter of months, I said, now I found something that I belong in. This is where I truly belong. When decades went by, I was a swimmer and had a loving family, and those are all great things. But they weren't my true identity. My true identity the more I went to lodge, the more I prayed, which is the way my medicine man told me to pray. He said, just pray. And I didn't know how to do it, and I got on my knees, and I came to lodge, and I can remember asking Tony Stonehawk, when is ceremony over? And it's very important. He said, Wayne, ceremony is never over. And I'm like, wow, that's big. So he said, Wayne, every thought is a prayer. And I didn't know that. You see, because I only thought that my prayers was only at ceremony, that Creator only heard my prayers at ceremony. But he said, your thoughts are your prayers, so be careful what you pray for, and pray hard all the time. Pray for all those things good, all those things that you want, all those good things, those spiritual concepts that you want in your life, willingness and courage and wisdom. And I didn't know all this. Nobody taught me the spirituality until Tony Stonehawk. I came in, and he taught me in this loving way. He taught me how to pray. He taught me how to pray for my sacred brothers and sisters. He taught me how to pray for the trees. He taught me how to get connected with all life, not just my brothers and sisters, not just my birth family. I didn't have to make any more choices whether I was gonna just love one family or just love the other, or love one family more. I love everybody equally, and I didn't understand that going in, but the more I prayed, all life is sacred, no matter where I come from, no matter where I'm going, all life around me. I'm in the middle of something so awesome right here, not only this Inipi, but every day that I walk with Creator, and I walk with the sounds of the birds, and the sun rising, and I'm a part of all that. I'm a part of all creation, and I didn't understand that when growing up, especially as a little child. I didn't understand. I was a part of anything. So 32 years later, I'm walking the spiritual road. It's called the Red Road. It's the way we walk, the Indian walking. You don't have to be an Indian to walk the spiritual path, and it's the way we carry ourselves, the way we hold ourselves, the way we pray. We honor everything. We honor all life. So I had to learn how to forgive, and one of those things I was holding on to for so long was my anger towards the Canadian government and what it had done to me, and what it had done to my family. And that anger, living a spiritual life, it just wasn't serving me anymore. It was blocking me from the sunlight of the Spirit. I couldn't learn how to serve others if I held on to that anger. I didn't know how to do it. I couldn't do it. My medicine man, Tony Stonehawk, said, learn how to forgive. Learn how to forgive. So this is where I went, back to my roots, back to my native spirituality. And he said, sit by the sacred fire and pray over the sacred fire, and learn those lessons from the fire, and learn those lessons from the womb of Mother Earth. And so that's what I did. I took in all that anger, that angry little boy that was still inside me. I had to go in there, and I had to release all that anger, put that into the fire, leave that in the sweat lodge, leave that in prayer. And I said, Creator, please just take this from me. It doesn't serve me anymore. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be the victim anymore. And so he said, okay, and I was released. I was released from it. And it's taking a breath for the first time. It just wasn't there, and so I went back to ceremony. Always, Tony Stonehawk always says, go back to ceremony, and please tell the fire what they had done, the spirits what they had done, what the spirits had done for me, what I couldn't do for myself. So I did. I went back to the sacred fire, and I gave gratitude. Thank you for healing me. And now I said, Tony Stonehawk, what do I do now? And he says, now your job is to give it away, to teach other people to learn how to forgive.